It is Spoken Freely, the sports podcast, talking all things and everything sports in the state of Oklahoma. And I've been gone for a while. I stopped probably around the end of high school football season and just never made my way back. But the prodigal son has returned. I'm your host, Glenn Brockenbush, and joining me today to talk a little NFL draft, a man who in many ways was my predecessor at the Lawton Constitution, a man who made his mark there for, I believe, about 5 years, doing great work. And he now is a host of the Triple Play podcast, where they talk all things sports and sports betting. He is Mr. Kyle Vrska. KV, I'm so glad we finally got to do this because we've been talking about this for a long time.
Yeah, man, I know that we talked about for sure doing something betting around the NFL season. We just never really were able to make it happen. I moved during that time, and that just throws everything off for sure. But yeah, I'm happy to be here.
As you mentioned, you are a big NFL fan, and a big sports fan in general, and the NFL can be hard to keep up with sometimes. If not for fantasy football, I would probably be happier because I wouldn't be stressing about worrying about what Calvin Ridley is doing, because why do I care? But also, if not for fantasy football, I wouldn't know how a lot of these players are doing. But the NFL draft is where, and as you mentioned, with NBA and to a certain extent with the NFL, even though the contracts are structured differently and everything, you do have the offseason has become such a big soap opera in and of itself. And to me, the beginning of that is the NFL draft. Obviously, free agency has become such a huge part too this year, with guys like J.J. Watt changing teams, and good gravy. Pretty much everything that the Texans have done wrong in like the past 12, 16 months. But the draft is something that is near and dear to my heart, and in many ways, it is like I compare it to a holiday like Christmas or New Year's, and that I tell myself I'm not going to care this year. I tell myself don't get hyped up for it, and then it happens, and I put on my ugly Christmas sweater. I celebrate, and then before you know it, it's done. And I'm like, oh, it's gone, huh?
Yeah.
That was anticlimactic.
No, it's a weird thing that so many people are excited about, because it's literally just the commissioner or some other people go up on a stage and read a name off a card. That's all that it is.
It is essentially like the most high pressure, like job search, like job fair there is. Like, hey, we want you on our team. We want you in our company. We are hiring you. I'm like, if that had been a thing in 2011, the Lawton Constitution selects Kyle Vrska, and you put on the hat, you go hug Joey. This year especially, I think is going to be very interesting for the people of Oklahoma. And I tie this into my podcast because I try to cater it to the people of Oklahoma, because every podcast needs its own little niche, I guess. But I remember tweeting last year that if I remember correctly, not a single player from an Oklahoma high school got drafted in the NFL draft. And obviously, me being from Texas, Texans are like almost way too proud of their high school football. I say I can cut the almost. They are way too proud of their high school football. And, you see so many lists of like, here's all the players drafted in the first, your Myles Garrett's, your Ed Olivers, your Baker Mayfields. This year, not only do we have a lot of kids from Oklahoma high schools, but obviously a lot from the colleges, because it was a great year for college football in Oklahoma in many ways. I mean, yeah, Oklahoma State didn't have the season they might have liked. Tulsa kind of came on like a flash at the end of the season, and obviously Oklahoma producing some pretty darn good players. So what I asked you to do prior to this is, people like Mel Kiper, people like Daniel Jeremiah, they all have their big boards. Well, I was going to ask you to kind of give me your big board, and we can kind of compare and contrast my little makeshift list. I gave you a list of the players from Oklahoma colleges that are being considered as top draft prospects this year, and kind of you give me your insight on where you think they will be drafted, should be drafted, and kind of how you rank them, not just as where they'll be drafted, but just pound for pound, how good a prospect you think they'll be.
So I'll just say, I'm from the Tulsa area, and it's always a lot of fun whenever the Golden Hurricane is good. I interned with the Tulsa Drillers out of college, but then I sat in the booth with the great Bruce Howard, who's the voice of both men's basketball and football for the Golden Hurricane, and that was 2010, and they were pretty solid that season. They just come off, I think, in 2009, like a really big season. They won like 10 games. They almost beat Arkansas in Fayetteville, and they probably should have. I think they lost by either 7 or 3, and there was like a late play that kind of changed the game. So, having said all that, my favorite player from the state, or from one of the Oklahoma schools, is Zaven Collins from Tulsa. That dude was literally everywhere, every time, especially, over the final 6-7 games for Tulsa. He's just making every big play out there. He's so big and he's so athletic, having been a former quarterback at the little town of Hominy, Oklahoma. Yeah, Hominy, Oklahoma. But I mean, he's hyper athletic. He has long arms, and he can blitz. He can do everything that you want out of a linebacker. But I'm also a little bit at odds, because linebacker is sort of the running back of the defense to me, in that it's a fungible position. I know obviously you want to have playmakers at every level, and I do believe that Zaven Collins is that, but I don't know. I would definitely not take a linebacker, certainly in the top 15 picks. That would just be a crazy thing to me. I do think Collins is going to go in the first round, but it'll be somewhere in the mid 20s probably, which I think is perfect for him. I mean, he doesn't have great top end speed, so covering guys sideline to sideline might be an issue. But he's so good at everything else, and having been a former quarterback, he sort of knows how offenses are going. So even if a defense gets caught in its base defense against 3 wideouts, he still can be a guy who can cover, certainly cover a tight end, but cover a slot receiver at least. It's not going to kill you like it would for a lot of teams out there. So I really like Zaven Collins. I think he's going to have a pretty big impact on wherever he goes.
Yeah, I'm trying to find where I had him kind of in my little recent hastily done mock draft, but I loved watching him play, and it was so interesting because it seemed like they played a lot of either like midweek games or like kind of later games.
It was just games whenever they could happen last season.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, with freaking COVID. Yeah. And but I remember there were a couple times where I would obviously be getting the paper out, and I would kind of know that they were playing, but yeah, at the end of the night, you would see not just Twitter, not just like a local Twitter, like the people that we know from that cover Tulsa sports.
Shout out the great Kelly Hines.
Oh, Kelly Hines, awesome. It came and spoke when I was in college, which she was probably maybe like a couple years older than us at the time, and already like insanely professional. But I know that, she and like ESPN and Yahoo Sports would be like, I would be getting notifications on my phone like, did you see the Tulsa game last night? I'm like, no, why should I? And Zaven Collins won it with like a freaking, walk-off interception, or they had a kid, the fact that I think I even voted for him, like probably top, or if I had a vote in the Heisman, I probably would have put him top 5. Like he had maybe, I don't know, he had an amazing season. And to see that out of a player from Tulsa, like you said, and I know I'm not a native Okie, but I know what it's like to have those private schools that don't have like the, huge budget, huge tradition necessarily, have those special seasons. It's so much fun for the community.
Yeah. And just coming from a little school like that and putting on a show at a D1 football college in state is something that Oklahomans take great pride in, for sure.
Now here's a little trivia for you, because I can't name this, but you being from Oklahoma and you having worked in this industry a lot, can you name what is Homini's mascot? I couldn't even tell you.
Oh, dude, I have no idea.
I couldn't
That
even.
is my guess. I just default to Tigers.
Okay.
But I legitimately have
my other default, because it's Oklahoma, was going to be the Indians, but I don't know.
You're pretty safe just guessing Tigers, Warriors, or Indians.
Yeah, Tigers. Yeah, Eagles. Yeah, I'm trying to find where I had Tevin Jenkins. Again, like you said, it's not a position that's got a ton of need, that a ton of people necessarily need. And you've got a couple really, okay, I have him going second round, which I did do this mock couple, probably I don't know, maybe 7 or 10 days
Jenkins ago. Did you mean Collins?
Zaven Collins, yeah. Yeah, sorry. We'll get to Mr. Jenkins in a bit, but yeah, Zaven Collins, I had him, I think, going 37, because there's just not a ton of teams in the first round that maybe need a ton of help at linebacker. Browns come to mind, and if you like a guy with range like a Owusu Koromoa out of or however you pronounce that, Owusu Koromoa out of Notre Dame, he and Zaven Collins are probably two of the best. Now, other players, there's at least one player for sure that I think most people are predicting will go first round out of the state of Oklahoma. And I just kind of spoiled it a second ago. Tevin Jenkins is a guy that I find so interesting, because as somebody who watches a lot of Oklahoma State football, I was not sold on Tevin Jenkins for the longest time. And I think early on, it might have been against Tulsa, one of the early games of the season. I guess Todd McShay was doing sideline reporting, and he said they have a tackle in Tevin Jenkins that I believe will be a first round pick. And I had to get the wax out of my ear, because I was like, no, we don't have good for. When does Oklahoma State ever, after Russell Okun, have offensive linemen that get drafted in the first 4 rounds, let alone the first? But a guy like Tevin Jenkins, you watch him, and everybody points to the tape against Texas this year. Yes, Joseph Osai, I think, ended up wrecking shop and having like 3 sacks, but a lot of the game, he was neutralized by Tevin Jenkins. And one thing that you notice with him is he's got a very, and this is coming from somebody that has not watched just a ton of offensive line play in his day, got a weird kick step. That first step, he plants and definitely sets the edge. Well, I guess sets the edge is more of a defensive term, but he really sets up to block. Do you see him being a potential left tackle, or do you think he's kind of your prototypical right tackle?
So the thing with Jenkins is he has like shorter arms than you want as a tackle, so guys are able to get into him. So I think he's probably going to actually end up as a guard.
And that's not a bad thing. A lot of guys have gone on to be really good guards, and you can make good money as a guard too. Not the same, same level, but
yeah. But so the thing with Jenkins is, if he gets his hands on you, it's essentially over. But because his arms are so short, and I don't want to say that he's like T-Rex out here, but I mean, if they're able to get into his body, then he can have some issues. And I'm not sure. I don't think he's ever going to be like an elite offensive lineman that people like talk about, because I mean, there's so few of those anyway. But I do think that he's going to be in the league for a long time, and is going to be somebody that can help whatever team he lands on. I don't think he's going to be a left tackle. He's either going to make it as a right tackle, or he's going to shift to guard. But either way, like, he is a very good offensive lineman that will bury defenders as long as he gets to them first.
Yeah, and you mentioned the arms. I'm looking online right now, and I believe his scouting report says, his one knock is his arm length is about 32 and 7/8 inches. And ideally, you'd like for your tackles, especially, to have, ideally about 34-inch arms. And, that's going to be one of the things that they talk about. And I was listening to a podcast recently where they say, you got to have one of two things as an offensive lineman to prevent guys from getting to the quarterback. It's going to be your arms or your legs. You either got to have really good footwork and you're able to shift around and keep the guy at bay, or you got to keep him at bay with your arms. And And Tevin, like you said, that's maybe my only question in terms of taking it in the first round is, do you see him being a cornerstone of your team or a really valuable part of your team for the next 8 years, which is ideally what you want out of a first round pick, especially if you're picking him in the top 20, which some people, think if there is a run on offensive lineman in this draft, Tevin Jenkins could go. I've seen him go as high as mid-teens, and that I don't know. I think he'd be very good. I just don't know if that's a guy who's going to end up being one of the best offensive linemen in football in 5 years. I could be wrong. I think he'll be solid by far, and there's nothing wrong with solid.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think you want to draft him as your left tackle.
No.
If you have a good left tackle, adding Jenkins is going to be an even better pick for you as either right tackle or shifting down to guard.
The next guy that I will talk about, and not just for the record, if anybody cared, I think I have Tevin Jenkins going to the Dolphins with their second first round pick
at 18.
At 18, that's where I had them.
Yeah, that'd be a good spot.
I think that would be a good spot for him. I think anywhere lower than that, you're getting a real steal. The next guy, and I said at the beginning we were going to go kind of a big board style, and you mentioned you're kind of one of your favorite guys. There's really, I think, in my mind, 5 guys for sure that I think you're almost certain they will be picked in the first 3 rounds, certainly. And so I figure we'll talk about them, and then the rest of the guys, there's probably about another almost 10 guys from the state of Oklahoma. We can kind of pick who you think might be a steal or kind of a sleeper out of that. But we've gone through 2 of the top 5. Number 3 is a guy that I think, if not for his position, again, like Zaven Collins being in a position that doesn't have a ton of spotlight attached to it, if not for his position, I think as a hands down first rounder, just in terms of, to use the boxing analogy, pound for pound, for his weight class, I don't think there's any better in his position than Creed Humphrey. And it's funny that I use the boxing analogy because obviously boxing and wrestling are the same thing, but he's a huge wrestling guy, comes from a family of state champions and was a huge wrestler at Shawnee. And you can see it kind of in his play. It's all about leverage with him. He might not be as tall as you want most offensive linemen to be, but man, his technique is great. And I feel like if he stays healthy and if he's able to continue to work on what is already a really good skill set. I mean, this guy played on the best offensive line in football in 2018 in college football. And, all 4 of those guys end up getting drafted in the pros, and everybody, I think almost to a man. I mean, you can make a case for Cody Ford, but I think just about anybody that watched OU constantly that year said the best of those 5 isn't even draft eligible because they understood the how rare Creed Humphrey is. Now, obviously being at the center position, it's one of those things like you don't really, it's kind of a luxury, but it's also, you don't understand how important it is until you have a really bad center. And I think it's also somewhere you don't understand it until you have a really good center too. Because I think as the Dallas Cowboys, we just took for granted that Travis Frederick was going to be there the entire time. And then obviously he wasn't. And where do you think Creed goes? Because I've heard some people think, he should absolutely be picked in the first round. I've seen some mock drafts have him go in the 3rd round, which is ludicrous to me.
Yeah, so I echo everything that you just said. He's absolutely the best center in the draft, hands down. He excels at both pass and run blocking. And like you said, centers are often overlooked and you don't realize what you have until they're gone. I think he has to be a top half of the 2nd round guy. Whoever gets him is gonna have a long time starter for sure. I really don't have anything to add. I mean, you gave a great soliloquy there. He's incredible. You're right. He was on a line that had a lot of talent, and everybody's like, well, yeah, but he's the best one. He really does everything well. So yeah, I think whoever takes him is going to have a guy that they can build a line around for sure.
I think one of the telling things, and you had to do this for a while too, is as part of our job at the Constitution, is do the we do our weekly notebook for the city teams. We do a weekly senior player profile where we, kind of do a little expose on a senior football player. And I always like to ask some of the players, who do you model your game after? If they're a receiver, a lot of them will be like, oh, I want to play like Odell. I want to play like CeeDee Lamb. And
Sure.
obviously being in Oklahoma, the players from the Oklahoma schools are going to be more at their forefront. Every offensive lineman I asked this year either said, Zach Martin or Creed Humphrey was the guys that they tried to model the game after. And I said,
what do you like? Tackle.
Yeah, neither a tackle. But the interior linemen usually when I interviewed them obviously went for those guys. And I said, what do you like so much about Creed Humphrey? And I always heard, and this is a trait that I think every offensive lineman you love to see in them. And he said, he's just nasty. Just plays with the nastiness, man. And I've heard him speak at press conferences. Couldn't be a nicer guy, but he's also you also feel intimidated being around somebody that literally looks like if you were casting a lumberjack in a movie, that's who you would want to be like the lumberjack's best friend. Like, you can definitely see him being in a cabin in West Virginia with a, like plaid shirt on and a battle axe in his hand. Like he's just a burly big dude that can just play football lights out. And I'm really interested to see where he ends up. Selfishly, if the Cowboys are not sold on Tyler Biadasz or Joe Looney, I'm all for getting Creed Humphrey. Now, I don't think that's where they will go. And they have plenty of other needs, but he's one of those guys that I think if you are and I think you can absolutely relate to this, is if you have a favorite team, there are certain players where you're like, okay, my team doesn't necessarily need him. And that sucks because I really want him to do well, and I would love for him to do well for my team. I just hope he doesn't go to our rivals or something like that, And Kenneth Murray was a guy like that for me last year. As I said, just don't let him go to the freaking NFC East because I don't want to have to face him every year. And I hope Creed Humphrey doesn't end up in the NFC East because I don't want to face that guy.
Yeah, that was actually something I wrote down about Collins. Was like, that was my first thing. Is like, can the Cowboys get him, please?
Yeah.
Get rid of Jalen Smith.
Oh God.
Yeah.
That's a different topic for a different pod.
You're right. But yeah, Creed Humphrey is going to be a great pro for a long time.
I think so. We go to who if I were personally ranking, and again, Zaven Collins, if I were personally ranking these prospects, I mean, Tevin, it's really hard to knock him, but I would probably go just pound for pound. I think Creed is better at what he does than anybody in this list. Tevin, I think, will get drafted the highest and probably has a higher ceiling, or I guess maybe more higher floor than somebody like a Zaven, because we just don't know what really to expect out of Zaven, just because it's defense, it's so based on what scheme you go to and what they ask you to do. And the next guy, I think, and again, a guy who you talk about hate having to face guys, but really enjoy watching them play, is Ronnie Perkins is a guy who the image that sticks out in my mind, and somebody reminded me of the Texas Tech game. I completely forgot about that, which was his reintroduction essentially after the suspension. But the image that sticks out in my mind is the Bedlam game, where after terrorizing Spencer Sanders and or Shane Illingworth, he is just on the sideline giving the stare down to Oklahoma State. And I felt like he was staring into my soul. And I was like, oh no, what have I done to you, sir? He is a guy who plays with a ferocity, and a guy who, you look at that 2018 recruiting class and all the hype that they had around the defensive prospects, especially on the line that we're getting. And he's really the one that has stayed. Yeah. Ronnie Perkins was a guy who really made a name for himself early, but you also thought, but being the best guy on a really terrible defense, what does that say? And I think we really saw this year how much they miss him after that suspension. And that guy is somebody who maybe his, if you're talking about elite pass rushers, you got to have multiple moves. You got to have multiple ways to get to the quarterback. And, he's not necessarily the fastest guy, but I think he is going to be somebody who you absolutely cannot. One thing you can't teach is heart, and one thing you can't teach is personality. And that guy just likes to hit people. I mean, he just loves to get after the quarterback. And at the end of the day, that's kind of what his job is. So I think, I mean, physically, it'll be interesting to see again what kind of scheme he goes to. I think you're definitely looking for somebody who play, I don't know if you can convert him to a 3-4 backer necessarily, but I mean, again, I have no idea. I have no idea what weight he's at right now. So,
yeah. So he's going to be a contributor. I think he's a really good. If you have him as a depth piece, you're doing really well.
so, yeah.
If you have a guy who is really good off the edge, like say Myles Garrett for one, who you mentioned earlier, if you have a guy like Myles Garrett on one side, then Ronnie Perkins on the other side is going to be very good for you too. He's going to be, if he falls in the right place, he can be a sort of Matt Judon type player who his stats say he's, and I don't want to take anything away. It's like his stats say he's better than he is. Like Matt Judon doesn't deserve, or I don't want to say deserve. Everybody deserves every penny they make.
Yeah.
But Matt Judon got more than expected because his stats were so high, because he was able to clean up so many sacks. Like he wasn't creating the sacks, he was just there. Not to say that he wasn't getting in the backfield, but another guy on the other side is disrupting things and turning him into Judon. And that's what I see as Ronnie Perkins. I don't think he's going to be an anchor, but if he goes to a place that has a, top 15 defensive line, he's going to make them better. I don't think he can fix a bad one, but I certainly think if you get him as a guy in a rotation, then you're going to do very well.
I completely agree with that. I think he's a guy who, you're not picking him thinking, well, he's going to be a day one starter. No, not really. He's, again, defenses are so versatile now. It's in kind of in comparison to the NBA, how the NBA, it's almost positionless basketball now. You almost have, I don't want to say positionless defense, but you have, I mean, the fact that they're talking about, and I can't remember who it is now, but I mean, the name that comes to mind is like a guy like Mark Barron, who basically was a complete safety in college, and then is like a weird hybrid linebacker in the NFL, but also can cover the corner, or can cover the nickel. That is, you mentioned how beneficial it'd be for Ronnie to go to a team that already has a really good defensive line. Well, I don't know if that necessarily bodes well for him when it comes to my mock draft, because I think I currently have him going to the Jaguars in the second round, which Jaguars, not a great defense.
It would have been great about 3 years ago.
3 years ago, back in the Saxonville days. Hashtag Duval. I think if he goes to a team that needs, that really needs him to be good now, I don't know. I mean, I don't think anybody's looking at him as being a savior of the defense.
It's going to be a lot tougher for him for sure.
And, he is somebody that just, you saw the production. And like you said, the production doesn't even begin to really speak to how important he was to that defense. And he's going to be a really interesting case to see where he goes. I know some people that are absolutely in love with him, and I think he's a potential, like, early second, late first rounder. I'm like, I don't see him going in the first at all, but I think that this draft is so weird on the pass rushers, because and it was a weird year anyways, because you didn't get to see a lot of guys that sat out, or a lot of guys that only played 7 or 8 games. Well, here's a guy that didn't even play until late October. So it's going to be very interesting. It brings me to the fifth guy that I have is
I am so excited about this to see which one of these guys you chose.
As I would personally think is a surefire. I would say if he didn't go before the third round, I'm taking crazy pills. I have been on the Tylan Wallace train for so long, and this is maybe a homer pick and a closer to the heart for you Rush fans. I snuck that in there for you. A pick because I saw Tylan when he was 15 years old at the first game of his sophomore season of high school. And I remember thinking, well, this kid's really good. And you don't see talent like that usually come out of a school. A lot of the schools from Fort Worth ISD, almost almost like a Josh Jacobs coming out of Tulsa McLean, coming out of Tulsa. It's something that you just didn't always see. He goes on to Oklahoma State, has a really good career. I think could have had a better career, obviously, had he not gotten hurt. He's a guy that doesn't get a ton of separation all the time. And, I think Oklahoma State operated in the knowledge that, well, if you just throw the ball up to Thailand for what people call 50-50 balls, it was more like a 70-30 or a 75-25 most of the time, which is great, but that shouldn't be your game plan all the time. It's like having a really good basketball team. It's like, well, yeah, so-and-so can hit the three. Yeah, but what if he doesn't? Like, that shouldn't be, a hope and a prayer shouldn't be your playbook. I love his hands. I love his, the dude just, I will never get the image out of my mind being at the 2018 game against Texas, where Texas had this great defensive back recruiting class. They beat OU. They were, I think 6th in the nation, and he has almost 200 yards receiving in the first half, and has this catch down the sideline that's almost like a Lynn Swan type catch that you're just like, I don't know how he came down with that. And the guy made catch after catch after catch that just made your eyes widen. Again, the speed, when you're 6'1" and run a 4.6, that's going to hurt you. And that's where I don't, he had trouble getting off the line sometimes. Press coverage, is that going to be a concern at the next level? I love Tylan Wallace, and I hope he does well. I don't think he's more than I think his ceiling is a really good number 2 receiver, but I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what he does the first couple of years, and interesting to see where he goes.
Yeah. So again, you pretty much went through my list bullet by bullet there. I want to take you back to, I think, 2012. It may have been 2011. I'm getting old and I can't remember things anymore. I was so enamored with Ryan Broyles.
Mm-hmm.
Much like Ryan Broyles, Tylan Wallace just always seems to be open. He's such a good route runner.
Yep.
And even when he's covered, he's so good at going and catching the ball at its peak. And that was something that you mentioned. But do not draft wide receivers based on their highlights. Now, watch all their tape. Watch the 8-yard catches. Watch the 11-yard catches. Don't just watch the 35-yard up and over defensive back catches. Yes, those are amazing, and he's proving he can do that. But what matters is what happens between 8 and 15, because that's where most passes travel now. You're right. He doesn't have a lot of burst on the line, but he's got solid straight line speed. And one thing that, I know that Big 12 defense at least looked a little better last year, but I don't know how much of that was due to just the weird year. But I mean, he was always open. And is that Big 12 defense because he's always open? I think it's actually because of him. He has a chance to be a really good number 2 wide receiver for somebody. And the Cowboys' putrid offense combined with his injury really hurt his sort of publicity from last year. Because, I mean, his sophomore year, he was a finalist for the Blitnikoff Award and, arguably should have won it. It wouldn't have been like a travesty had he won it. And I don't think it was a travesty that Judy won it.
Right.
But I mean, that's the type of guy that he is. He is a very good guy that I don't, he's certainly not going to post anything near what he did he's not going to post anything in the NFL near what he did in college, but he can certainly be a really dynamic number 2 guy.
I completely agree. And I think that he is somebody who you look at, and this is a draft that obviously at the very top is very deep, I think, at wide receiver. And, the fact that you could get, just looking through some of the names here, the fact that somebody, people like, and you see so many of these shiftier, smaller speed guys going kind of the late first round, projected to go in the late first round. But, once you get past somebody like a Kadarius Toney or a Rondale Moore, you don't really know, I mean, you've got the Brown kid out of North Carolina who's got a ton of speed, but I I think the mid 40s would be a really nice spot for a guy like Tylan Wallace if somebody were gonna, if teams are looking for a wide receiver in the second round.
Yeah, I've actually got him higher than Perkins. I think Tylan Wallace ends up somewhere probably back half of the second round, somewhere in there. And I think Perkins, I think Perkins should go, and probably somewhere in the third round is where I would take him. But again, it depends on team need. But I'm looking at this from a an objective look of like, hey, I don't want to build my defensive line around him, which people will, and it's probably not going to be great for him. Yeah. But that's right. So I have Wallace higher than Perkins, but we had the same top 5 for sure.
I think that it's going to be and you can, I want to say relate to this, but also I think you cared a lot less about this than I do at times. And part of it was, I know you grew up watching OU football, but you didn't go to either of the Oklahoma schools. Me, I always feel like I kind of have this onus to, people are, and I've realized people are going to call you a homer no matter what, and gonna, get on your case. I received emails this past year, 2 in the same week, one each calling me a homer or basically saying I disliked OU. The other one saying I disliked OSU. I was like, well, sure. I've made it. Sure. And I think maybe I've maybe underrated Tylan a little bit at times, just because I wanted to make sure I wasn't watching him completely through orange tinted glasses. But when you talk to other people, I mean, I have plenty of OU friends who are like, oh, I hated playing that guy. Because, and I mean, you look at the 2018 game, that Bedlam game, that Oklahoma State in a all things considered, with Corn Dog as your quarterback, you have no business being in that game. And the fact that Tylan and again, that was the year that Oklahoma had just an atrocious defense. But I mean, Tylan Wallace just lit it up that day. And he is somebody who, I think, if you make sure, like you said, you're not asking him to, like you said, I think if it's the intermediate routes are so important, because so many people like watching these highlight reels, but watch what he does, watch how he blocks. He can actually be a really effective blocker downfield for his teammate, who we'll get to here in a second, because those are the 5 guys that we think will absolutely get drafted to the top, 2, maybe 3 rounds.